Welcome, YouTubers. This is Tona Brown, and I'm here with Monica Stevens. Thank you so much, Monica, for doing this interview with me. We are at the GLCCB, and I've always wanted to do an interview with Monica because she's been a huge inspiration for me, and I think she's going to be an incredible inspiration for all of you. Monica has been there for me when I really needed someone to talk to, and I wanted to talk to someone who was a little older than myself, who had been through so much more than I had been through, and could give me a different perspective on life. And I really wanted for her to share that perspective with all of you. Thank you so much, Monica, for joining us. It's an honor to talk to you. You've been such an integral part of my development. You were there for me when I had a really close friend that I had to separate myself from. And so I really wanted to make sure that since this is my 10th year rebirth as Tona Brown, that I included you in this series. So thank you and welcome to my YouTube channel.
Thank you. That's really interesting because this is my 10th year as well.
Oh, wow.
I think around the time that we met each other, I remember hearing so much about you and wanting to meet you.
Aww.
So, to me, it's really a big honor to be here. When we first met each other, I was working at a corporation, and we were meeting there briefly, and we had talked about these plans to do some things, to make some big changes in the community, and they never really took root. But then, as fate would have it, or as the universe, or as God, or Kismet, or however people may put it, we had an opportunity a few years ago to spend some time together and to get to intimately know each other.
That's right. That's right.
And it ended up being a really valuable time for me, because I've had hopes and dreams for a long time, but it's taken me a long time to come to my own realizations and my own truths. And it's taken me a long time to meet other women like me, and it's difficult in a world that says that you don't belong to find a niche when you don't find other people like you. So it's really an honor for me to be here.
Well, thank you. I think that your story is going to be one that touches a lot of people, and that's why I wanted to talk to you. And let's talk about your story a little bit. Tell us a little bit about yourself, like growing up. What was it like? Because one of the things that we used to talk about, and what touched me so, was there was a time when there wasn't a term for who we were. And tell us a little bit about that. You said there was no term, there was no transgender term.
That's true. One of the things that I wear proudly is my age. I'm 59 years old.
I was going to ask you, but it's so rude to ask the lady that. But so you're 59 years old.
I wear that proudly.
Good for you. Good for you.
I wear that for a number of reasons. I wear it because I've lived through a lot of things. I've gotten had the opportunity to see a lot. In fact, I was in a conversation with someone on Tuesday about the riots in Baltimore in 1968, because this is someone who had read about it in a book, and I had a chance to share with them a little bit of what that was like. But I've also had a chance to have some conversations with my aunt. I used to steal my aunt's clothes when I was 4 years old.
Wow.
And because her clothes, frankly, were a lot cooler than my mother's clothes. I tried my mother's clothes, but my mother's clothes were kind of like, remember the old church ladies that used to wear the real flowery dresses, and they didn't really have a lot of shape to them. And and those are like my mother's clothes.
Oh, okay.
But my aunt,
you're way too fierce for that.
My aunt was dressed. And so I would put on my aunt's clothes and have a little fashion show because I spent the summer with my aunt.
Oh, wow.
And I would get up late at night and have these little fashion shows in the bathroom at my aunt's house. And then I would fold them up and stick them behind the radiator in the bathroom. And after a while, I would go over to my aunt's house, and there would be these things neatly folded up, waiting for me.
Oh, my.
And so she knew.
So she knew that you were going through her clothes. And how old were you again?
Well, the thing about it is I thought I was 5 or 6, but she told me 4 years ago that I was 4.
Wow.
And she told me that she had tried to tell my mother. I went through my whole life thinking my mother never knew.
Oh my.
And she said that she tried to tell my mother, but my mother was so convinced that she wanted me to be the next Thurgood Marshall. She wanted me to grow up to be this fierce lawyer and change the world. Mm-hmm. And so my mother and I never had a chance to have a conversation about it. My mother passed before I had a chance to have a conversation with her.
Oh man, how did that make you feel?
It made me feel at the time like something was missing and it was unfinished business. Had this conversation with my aunt though, kind of gave me a different perspective. I never knew that my mother ever knew.
That had to be really special.
It was very special.
So you were raised in what area? We are in Baltimore, Maryland. Is this where you're from?
I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. I was raised in East Baltimore. My family is from North Carolina and South Carolina and Virginia.
All right now.
Yeah, and so at heart, I'm really a country girl.
Right, and everyone knows that I'm very much a country woman, and I'm very proud of it. We have some backwoods ways of thinking about things at times, but I really cherish that upbringing, and I think that's why we were able to connect, you know, with the generation gap.
Yes.
And I also was raised in the South that you're supposed to respect your elders and to learn from them. So if I'm doing something wrong, I knew I could always come to you and say, look, I don't really understand why I'm having this issue, and you are always there and have always been there, and that means a lot to me. And you don't have that connection too much between trans women, especially of color, and that's something that I want us to talk about later on. But you know, tell me a little bit about some of the things that you went through, because I remember you told me, and you also tour around talking to people, and I would like to see you do more of it, to be honest. It's not your fault that you don't, but I would love to see you go around the country and tell people about the way you found your womanhood, because it was a long struggle to get there. And so tell us a little bit about some of the things you went through, because I don't think people would believe it.
My journey was probably a bit different from a lot of transgender women of color. I know the women that I've met all seem to transition early, and they seem to, a lot of them have gotten their roots from the drag scene or the ball scene or you know, something in the streets, and that was never where my influences came from. My influences were my mother and my aunts and my grandmother and women in my family, but there was always a confusion about that for me, because I couldn't understand why I was more like them than the men in the family, and everything in the world said you're supposed to be like the men in the family, but everything about me was like the women in the family, and so just trying to work all that out. So there were a lot of stops and starts.
And was it like the typical Southern family? Were they very religious like mine was?
Absolutely.
What was that like?
Absolutely very religious. And so it was difficult to grow up with this idea that I was supposed to honor my mother and father and love God and do all of these things, and raised up in the church. And when it came right back to it, I was still me inside.
That's right.
So that was very difficult. And the first time that I really tried to transition, I was 17, and I'd been put out of the house by then because I was out of control. I was, when I look back at it now, if I was my child, I would have put me out of the house. You know, I would have put me out of the house too. I was stealing, I was using drugs, I wasn't minding my parents, I was rebellious, and there was nothing they could do with me.
Do you think that some of that, though, looking back, hindsight 2020, as they say, some of that might have had to do with the turmoil going on the inside, trying to figure out who I am, dealing with it? You know, tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, absolutely. At that time, there was a big thing going around talking about how you could be gay and you don't know it. And so to add even further to the confusion, I was never attracted to men.
That's right.
My first crush, there was this girl from the country named Wanda. She was from Virginia too. And I remember that story well too, because I got sent over to the corner store, and I'm walking down the street going to the corner store, and this baseball come whizzing up the street, and I went looking down the street to see who threw this baseball, and it was this girl. And she threw this baseball up the street, and then she was like, throw this ball back down the street. Now I'm going to show you something. And so then she threw the ball with her other hand up the street, and I was in love, and the only thing I was thinking was, you know what? I'll get her to beat up Clinton Stokes and walk me home and carry my books.
Right.
And that was the most natural feeling in the world.
Right.
And to me, here's the whole thing about it. There were no labels.
Okay.
There was no, you were lesbian. I didn't know anything like that. All I knew is that felt good, and I dreamt about her, and I used to have daydreams about her, and she could ride a bike, and she could do all this stuff. And when I told my cousin told on me.
Oh, okay.
So the
That
only time
devastating.
it was devastating, but the only time I had bad feelings is when I tried to tell somebody who I was and how I felt. And when I tried to tell somebody who I was and how I felt, they either told me I was crazy, I was going to hell, I was sinful, I was dirty, or some other kind of negativity.
Of course.
You know, and so I couldn't understand how I could have all this negativity and all these things could be wrong with me, when at the same time I was smart, I was the best one in school, I was kind, I could walk around with a can and say donate to this charity and raise more money than anybody.
That's right.
So how could I be all of this? So it was very confusing. Anyways, long story short, by the time I got to be a teenager, some stuff had happened to me. I'd been raped and molested. And so I was trying to figure out why these bad things were happening to me, why I felt the way I felt, why no matter how much I tried to be a boy, I still knew inside that I was a girl. I didn't have anywhere to go to talk to anybody about it. I'd never seen anybody like me, you know, and I didn't feel like I belonged anywhere, and it seemed like even God didn't even want me. And so it was a mess.
I can imagine. I mean, how does a young person deal with all of that? You know, that's stuff that is heavy for an adult, but imagine, well, you don't have to imagine, but, you know, just for a young person to deal with and to have gender issues. So you deal with being raped and molested, you deal with a family that just doesn't understand, not all of them, as you said, and there were some family members, like in my family, that really did understand and tried to protect me. And I feel that they might not have even known how to in your time.
Right. You know, like I said, I got put out the house when I was 17. And I became, I guess, sort of a hippie, because I heard hippies were all about peace and love. I had seen some hippies on television, and they were dancing in a park, and a girl had a butterfly painted on her face, and she was spinning around, and they were talking about peace and love. So I wanted peace and love, because that was magic.
Of course.
And so I ended up in actually this neighborhood in Mount Vernon.
Oh, wow.
And so what I ran into was a bunch of people who talked about peace and love, and actually what happened is a bunch of people who stayed high all the time. You know, to be perfectly honest. And so I stayed high all the time.
Okay.
And I went to a whole lot of orgies, and I really still didn't find a whole lot of people who were like me, but I did run into, it was the first time I encountered a drag queen.
Okay. And they were free thinkers.
And they were free thinkers.
So
but that still wasn't quite who I was, but I learned how to do makeup.
Okay.
I learned something about how to put myself together. And so I did drags for a while. I tried to trick for a while. I wasn't very good at it. Because I had to trick with men. I wasn't very good at it because I didn't really want to trick with men. Sometimes I didn't even get the money. But it just didn't work very well for me. You know, so I tried that for a while. It didn't work. And then I decided maybe I need to be normal. And so I try to go and be normal.
What is normal?
Well, you know, when you try to be normal, you know what normal is. You don't do that very well either. You know?
So what did you try to do? Because I think this is so important. Like, when we try to be something that we're not, no matter what society says, it is kind of hysterical. Yeah. It really is.
Well, I went searching for God, and I ended up joining what was called Jesus Freaks, but it ended up being a cult.
Oh my.
I ended up, and it's really, really funny because I talk about it now, and it's amazing how many people I've run into who knew about this Children of God cult. And somebody last year told me that they still exist, they're still around.
Wow.
Yep, I joined this cult in D.C.
Okay.
And they were going to take me from D.C. They actually took me from D.C. to Virginia to Pennsylvania, and then they were going to take me out to the Midwest somewhere. And I didn't even realize that I was in danger until I got out the cult. And then later on, I saw something on the news about cults and how people go into cults, and then they disappear and you never hear from them again.
Oh my goodness.
No, and the only reason I got out this cult is I went to talk to one of the elders one day, and I smelled weed. And I was like, it smells like somebody been smoking, weed in here. And, and they wanted to tell me that, I ain't smelled what I was smelling. And then this girl came out of his room, and supposedly they were having some kind of conference. And I had no sense to know what the conference, and I smelled weed. And I began to get disillusioned.
Okay.
And whenever you question the elders, they made you sit in the middle of the floor in a chair, and everybody sat around you, and they started talking all this stuff. And anyways, I left that cult and ended up in another cult.
Whoa, how did that happen?
And, well, because I was still disillusioned, and I still felt like I needed God, and I was still looking for God.
Okay.
And this is when the exorcism happened.
Oh dear.
Because I ended up in another cult, and I'm still feeling like I was who I am. I'm still feeling like I was supposed to be a woman. And it's really, really, really hard when you find a group of people that you really think you can trust.
Right.
And it took a long time to realize that basically I'm an honest person.
Right.
And so I found somebody that I thought I could be honest with. And I remember one night just telling my roommate that I'm really not supposed to be here. I'm not supposed to be in here with these men because I'm really a woman. And when I look back on it, what they thought they were doing is they thought they were purging a demon from me. But it was horrifying. And when I look back on all of those experiences, and I look back at how I used drugs worse every time I walked away from one of those experiences, I came away with the feeling that God couldn't even help me. And that it just got worse and worse and worse and worse. And one of the things they told me was if I leave there, that my life was going to get worse. And they put some Bible verse that said that your demons will get 7 times worse if you do some old stuff. And so I went away thinking that it was all my fault. And so things like that contributed to me just going on and on and on. And my life spiraling out of control. When I really, really look at my whole experience, and I really, 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 it's really been like a journey to love, and it's really been like a journey to self-love. Because after that, I decided that, well, the only way for me to really, really be cured, because I decided that I had some kind of disease or something was wrong with me, was to get married. And I found a woman who didn't marry me, but she had my child. And then I started to transition again into a relationship. The one constant truth is you can't get away from who you are.
That's right. That's right.
You know, and we were together for a long, long time.
Yes, you were. I remember you told me.
We were together for 18 years.
You really loved this woman.
Yeah,
and she really loved you.
And she really loved me. You know, and the children loved me. And by the grace of God, my children still love me today.
Good.
And my grandchildren love me today. But that was rough.
It had to be. It had to.
That was really, really, really rough.
And you were on drugs at this time, right?
Yeah, I mean,
that was after, or
no, I was on drugs at this time. My drug addiction got worse. My drug addiction lasted 30 years. You know, and finally, you know, I was able to get off of drugs. Finally, 14 years ago, I was able to get off of drugs. But,
good for you.
But they went through the ringer.
Yeah. And then you had a son that passed away?
I had a son that took his life. And so for a long time, I blamed myself for a whole lot of things. I even wondered if he somehow found out, because my MO was always to hide.
Okay.
And so for a long time, I just thought that maybe he found out and he was ashamed of me.
But you know now that he probably didn't know.
No, his self-anger was totally different.
Something totally different from
Something
you.
totally different.
But isn't that something how we as women tend to take everything in? It's always our fault. A family member who's upset about you being who you are, well, it's okay. It's our fault. It's not okay. Because at least we're living our authentic truth. And who are we harming by being who we are? We're not harming anyone. We're just being who we are. And thankfully, whether it took 30 years or 5 or 10, at some point you have to accept who you are. And that's what I love about your story, because you went through all of those things. And now look at all the phenomenal things that you're doing. And you're just such a strong woman. And it's because of all those experiences.
Well, interestingly enough, one of the things that happened was I went through a period where I couldn't sleep. I went through a period where it just I would go weeks at a time without sleeping, and I started to see a therapist, and I don't even remember how I found this therapist.
Okay.
But I found this therapist out in Hunt Valley, and she's not from the United States. She's from the Mediterranean, and so she had a whole different way of looking at things. She didn't look at things like Western doctors at all, and she had me look at things a whole different way. One of the things that she told me, I met her about 5 or 6 years before I stopped using drugs, and one of the things she said to me, she said, you would sleep a lot better if you didn't do so much cocaine. But
wow, she was just blunt.
Yeah, she was blunt. But one of the other things she said to me, she said, there's nothing abnormal about you being a woman. She said, who we are inside has nothing to do with our external organs. And I had a hard time accepting it, but she made me think about it. And so it began. I'm convinced that's where my journey to accepting myself began. Because I had to keep thinking about what this woman was saying. And she said, you put on all these clothes and you put on all these things and you do all these rituals because you're trying to convince yourself. She said, but from everything you told me, you've known for a long time. And when I thought about it, I realized she was right. And the reason I bring it up is because she's my therapist now.
Oh, wow. So you kept that connection.
Well, the thing is actually, we lost touch, but I went and found her again.
Okay. Oh, good. Good.
Because I realized that since I've gotten some clarity and I realized that since I'm not using drugs anymore, then she could really benefit me. And so I decided to go back and find her again.
Good. And I know when we first met, you were working with organizations that help mental illness, Hearts and Ears. I was working there. I was volunteering there for a while. And how do you feel about that? You've also had to work through mental illness issues. Do you feel that those are separate from transgender issues? They're one and the same to a certain extent?
Oh, they're separate. But I do know that not being able to resolve the two really left me depressed.
Of course.
So, going to a therapist, I would say that anybody going through a transition, it can help just to have somebody with another point of view. So, having a good therapist is a good thing, especially if you're looking at things like surgery. Another part of this whole story for me is having physical issues that have been a challenge.
That's right. I wanted to talk about that as well. I feel that the mainstream media tends to only showcase us in one light. And, one thing I love about you, you have a way of being comical about certain situations, but really reflecting because you're a writer. And it'll make you reflect on something. And we were talking on the phone before the interview last week or so, and you said, something to the effect of how can we expect the media to portray our stories better than we can. And that is my goal in this series. One, because it's my 10-year rebirth of myself, learning to love myself, learning to accept myself, and seeing that in other women just makes me really, really happy, whether they're transgender or not. But there are a lot of women who transition who for various reasons are unable to either afford surgeries, and I say plural because there's so many of them, afford surgeries or hormone therapy. You mentioned that, having issues with the actual surgery. What were your issues? You had diabetes, you were diagnosed, and so it caused...
I have this picture. Yeah, this picture is December 22nd of 2001, and this is my last job in food. About 5 months before I had a heart attack on my job. And it's the last...
So in food, but you weren't working at McDonald's. This is...
Oh no, that's me as a
You're
chef.
a chef, gourmet chef.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, this man always had a private party at his house. Because he made donations to the college, so we did a private party. And so one of the other things that made it so that surgery would be a challenge for me is I'm a heart attack survivor. Yeah, I got diagnosed with diabetes, I guess about 9 years before this. And so it would be really challenging to do hormones. I have a girlfriend in D.C. who got diagnosed with diabetes, and she kept on with hormones anyways, and she's lost hers.
Oh, dear.
Now, since then, I've gotten a different doctor. I got a doctor from India who says that he's watched some other people from his country who've been able to get their sugar in a certain range, and they've been able to use the hormone patch and has some success with it. And so we've negotiated where if I can get my sugar under better control, then maybe I can get the hormone patch. And so,
you're looking forward to that?
I am looking forward to that. In about 2 weeks I have another appointment at the doctor.
Oh, congratulate. Hopefully that we get that.
Well, the report that I have to give right now is my sugar hasn't been over 120 in 2 months.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Yesterday morning it was 88, and today it was 105. So that's normal. So my sugar has been normal. What he wanted to do is look at it for a 3-month period. And they do a test called an A1C, which is a blood test. And it tests your sugar over an extended period of time. And 6.1 is normal. So if I get a normal test, then they'll put me on a patch, which is a low dose of estrogen that sort of drips into your body in a controlled way. And I've thought about it, and I've talked to some people about it, and I've kind of gone back and forth before I made my mind up. Because one of the things that I had to look at, and I talked to some people about, is it'll take 18 months to 2 years before I see any kind of result. And I asked myself, do I want to be a 61-year-old woman finally getting some hips and some boobs? and it is a consideration.
Of course.
It is a consideration. But I had to look at the whole picture. And it would be different if I was really on some kind of real downslide. But I'm not.
Good for you.
But I'm not. And the other side of it is, obviously it's something that's still occupying my mind. So if I don't take the opportunity, I'm always going to wonder if.
Of course.
I'm always going to wonder if. So rather than wonder if, then just like with anything else, I've got to take my best shot.
That's right. But you don't feel that because you haven't been able to have your surgery, or do you? Because you haven't been able to have any surgeries or be on hormone therapy, you don't feel less of a woman, or how do you feel about that?
You know, one of the interesting things about this whole experience is, I think the first part of this journey that I had to really, really get in touch with, for me, was the spiritual part of this journey.
That's right.
Because the part of this journey, when I look back over my story, that was most troubling for me was the spiritual part. Because that's what led me to get into 2 cults, and that's what led me to be so much trouble with my family, and that's what led me to have so much internal struggle. Was the belief that God didn't love me, because I grew up with a strong belief in God.
That's right. Oh, that's horrible.
You know, I don't remember exactly where I was, but I heard something, and it's just like, it wasn't new, and it wasn't something I hadn't heard before, but it was like, God looks at your heart. And I remember having this dream, and in the dream I was sitting down in a chair, and it was a dark room, and I couldn't see anything, but I could hear the voice of God, and God said, well, if you truly believe that you were a woman on the inside, then why did you lie to those people for all those years just because you were afraid they wouldn't like you? And I couldn't answer the question. And I realized that if that's what the judgment is going to be about, then, you know, because when I really, really looked at it, it was never about all of those other things that somebody else was telling me. Because the truth of the matter is I've never been an unkind person.
That's right. That's right.
You know, and I began to look back over my life, because they were always talking about how God look back over your life. And I remember I was like 5 years old. My father and I were raising money for a charity. I think it was cerebral palsy or something like that.
Okay.
And I raised so much money, I got to meet Michael Landon.
Oh my goodness!
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. We had so many cans that he had to drive me downtown. We dumped them in this bin, and we got to meet Michael Landon. And then I had to say to myself, did I just make that up, or is it true? I asked my father. My father said, yep.
How old were you?
I was 5.
Whoa!
And he said, yep, we sure did. He said, you got on television too.
Wow.
And so when I started to look at things like that, I realized that, you know what? No, you know.
No one has the right to judge you or anyone else, myself, anyone. No one has that right to do. And some of us, you know, like we've talked about in the past about, you know, different cultures see us totally different from Western cultures, especially Native American cultures. We're seen as shamans. We're seen as religious leaders. And it's so interesting to be in a culture here in America where we're put down so much.
Right.
And how does that affect someone's psyche? How does that affect their lives and the decisions they're making?